Hi everyone. Welcome back to the next video in our Excel demonstration series. In this video, we're going to be covering the week 4 tutorial question 2, right? So let's get into it. So in question 2, we want to try and visualize the distribution of Perth like house prices. Particularly, we want to have a look to see if we're dealing with a symmetrical distribution of house prices or if there is some degree of skew in the house prices, right? Something we might expect, and having a bit of a look at what we were able to see from question 1, is we might expect these house prices to be somewhat positively skewed, right? Looking at this maximum, right, of about 2.4 million compared to our median of only 545,000, right? It seems as though our tail, at least for the positive side of our tail, looks as though it's got a very large skew there. The other thing that's indicative of there being a skew is the size of our average relative to our median. This seems to suggest that we should have a very wide tail on the positive side of the distribution that's pulling up that average relative to the median. Okay, so we should be able to see this visually if we produce a histogram of the house prices. So let's grab our data. So we'll start by grabbing our house price data and copying and pasting it into this question 2 sheet. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a histogram, but then I'll also show you guys how you can use a pivot table as well to like also create a like histogram. So let's create our histogram. So we'll start by selecting our data, starting from our first cell, and then selecting all the way down. And then we're going to go up to Insert, and across to the middle here, we're going to select this option here in the middle around our different charts, right? It's this one that'll allow us to make a histogram. Alternatively, you could go through recommended charts. It'll probably be one of the charts that's already here, or we can go into all charts and you'll be able to go down and select histogram. Okay, so this is our histogram. Let's make it a bit more informative. So we're dealing with a Perth house price histogram. So we want to give when we're naming this chart, we want to give some information about our sample. In particular, this is a Perth housing price sample. We want to give some information about the variable that we're showing. That's the house price. And maybe we can give some information about the type of chart that we're showing. So this is a histogram, right? You could also call this a frequency distribution. All right, but let's also give this some axis titles, right? So we'll go in here, we'll go add axis titles. Alternatively, when you click on the options up here, let me just hide this real quick. When you go into chart design, after you've clicked on the chart, you can go to the left-hand side here and also go to add chart elements, right? But once you've got your axis titles there, we'll give it some informative names here. Along our x-axis, this is our house price ranges. And we want to give some information about the unit as well. So these are house price ranges. We'll make sure that we put a dollar sign to indicate that the house price is measured in dollars. And for our y-axis, what we're summarizing here in a histogram is just counts. So we can just call this count, right? Count doesn't have any units, so we don't need to specify it. Okay. All right, so I'll show you guys another way that we can make our histogram. We can also select the data here and start by creating a pivot table. So we'll select the data, go up to Insert, and then on the left-hand side, we're going to select Pivot Table. Then we'll select Existing Worksheet, and then select somewhere on our sheet here. So I'm just going to select below my chart. All right. I'm going to create a histogram of price versus itself. So I'm going to drag in price into my rows and then price into my values. I don't want to show the sum of price. Instead, what I want to do is show the count. So I'm going to go into my values here, click on it, value field settings, and then change this to the count. All right. Once I'm here, this isn't going to be very informative if I try and make a graph of lots of observations with, one or two observations. So I'm going to click on my like pivot table, go up into pivot table analyze, and then across here into the group section of my ribbon here, I'm going to click on group selection. Once I do this, it'll give me some default options on how to group my data, right? Something I could do if I want these numbers to, be a little bit cleaner, I could play around with this to make it more of like a whole number in some sense, like maybe start it at 200,000, finish it at like 2.5 million, so I don't have to deal with as many digits that aren't zero. But otherwise we can just leave this the way it is and just see what the chart looks like. Okay. Once we have this, we can click on our pivot table, go up here to pivot chart, and then we're going to click this option here, the clustered column. We can see that this looks somewhat similar to our histogram that we've already created, but what we can do is we can make this look a little bit more like a histogram by grouping together these bars. So if we click on the bars, right click on them, and then go Format Data Series, we'll get this menu option here appear on the left, and we just need to change this so that the gap width is 0. All right. And now it looks as though our gap width here, it looks a little bit more like a histogram because a histogram requires no gaps between the bars. Okay. Let's play around with this to make it look a little bit better. This legend here at the moment isn't telling us anything at all. So let's click on it and then delete it. Right? These field buttons, a lot of the time when you create a pivot chart, you'll be given these options here so that you can see the type of statistic that's getting presented in the chart. Alternatively, you can also get these drop-down arrows here that allow you to filter certain observations out, right? And sometimes that's useful, right? It makes the chart interactive, right? But if you're not planning on interacting with the chart or allowing a user to interact with it, they're just kind of cluttering up the space, right? We don't want to have chart elements that don't add anything to the visualization because they're giving the viewer unnecessary information, right? We want to make it clean and concise. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on these options here, go down to hide all buttons on chart, and we're going to get rid of them. All right, so let's do the same thing as before. We need to give this an informative title. This is our Perth house price histogram. And then we're also going to add in some axis titles. So this is going to be my house price ranges. And this is going to be my count. Okay. So very similar visualizations. If you want to play around with the ranges here for our original histogram, you can also right click on this axis, go format axis, and then there's some options here if you want to play around with the size of these bins. So for example, we could increase the number of bins, maybe make it 20 bins, right? And we can play around with play around with our shape, right? Okay, so let's try and answer this question. Does this distribution appear to be skewed? And what does it suggest about the housing market, right? So looking at our histogram, our suspicion, based on looking at our maximum, our average, and our median, that our distribution was positively skewed, appears to be like vindicated, right? This is a very positively skewed distribution, right? So what it suggests is that the Perth housing market, and this is something that's common across housing markets across the world, is that most of the houses are clustered at a certain point, and then very few houses are incredibly expensive, right? It lines up essentially with what you would expect based on a wealth or an income distribution, right? There's a lot of people that earn in the range of 70 to 120,000. And then as you get out towards the far end tail of the distribution, you start getting people earning 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, or something similar in terms of assets, right? That kind of relationship, it makes sense that we would see it in the house price, because this is like a financial asset that someone can own. So it makes a lot of sense that we're seeing this positive skewness, right? So we'll leave it there, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.